Hello and welcome to another episode of Anomalies, a show about things that are kind of out there in left or right field, depending upon your politics. I'm Dan Hall, one of your hosts, and I'm kind of the Lone Ranger tonight. Dave Jinks has got some other things going on, and Gwen Farrell, our newest team member, has some other obligations. So it's just me and a very interesting guest. And our guest tonight is James Clarkson. And I kind of know James, well, I just know him by reputation. And then we've had his wife, Joanne, on our show a time or two. So, James, welcome to Anomalies.
Hi, Daniel. How's it going?
You know,
Everything's good.
that's good. That's good. Um, so your email is kind of interesting email. It's UFO detective, right? Is that the email?
UFO detective at hushmail.com. It's interesting for a number of reasons. One of them is that that's what I call myself these days is a UFO detective, and how I got Hushmail as opposed to other kinds of email. That is a really good story.
Well, let's start there. Tell
Okay.
us that story.
This all started in 2014. I was the MUFON state director for Washington State for 10 years, from about 2007 to 2017. And in the year 2014, in the summer, I was with Joanne and we were out shopping. This is back when we lived in Olympia. And my cell phone rang, and there was a man on the other end of the phone. And he told me that he wanted to report a UFO, but he wasn't sure that he was willing to talk to me. And we sort of did a tap dance around each other. And it turned out that he works for a federal agency. And I will not identify the agency, nor will I identify him by name because I promised. Let me just say that it's a 3-letter agency.
Okay, one of
And
those.
one of those. And he wanted to tell me about something that happened to him in Vancouver, Washington, 3 days earlier in downtown Vancouver in broad daylight with excellent weather. We kind of tap danced with each other, and I swore to him that I would keep his identity secret. I have actually met him 3 times face to face. We've talked at length. I've seen his credentials. As a former law enforcement officer, I am certain that he is who he says he is and that he has the background that he has. He is what everyone would hope for in a federal agent. Healthy, in the prime of his life, excellent vision, a family man, a military veteran, highly trained, highly skilled, and with no background in UFOs. Didn't know a thing. Other than that, he did spend a lot of time in security work around various air bases. So he knew a lot about what normal aircraft look like on the ground and in the sky. So with that background, here's what happened. He and his partner are sitting in a car, and his partner is looking the other way. He's looking off to the right. And he's looking at it through an open window up at the sky over the Columbia River. He sees a disc-shaped aircraft that is bright metallic, reflective. He can see the reflections change as it tilts slightly. So he's convinced it's a 3-dimensional object. It looks like about the size of a dime held at arm's length. I should mention that that is one of the questions that you routinely ask a UFO witness. When they tell you they saw something in the sky, you say, okay, think back to when you were there and imagine you're looking at the object. What could you hold in your hand right out in front of you that would just cover it up? Now, I've had people tell me everything from a a little BB, all the way up to somebody who said you could unfold a newspaper and I could barely cover it because it was like
Wow.
right overhead. In this case, he said a dime would do it. A dime or slightly larger would just cover it up. So he sees this thing going across the sky, and he just knows that this is all wrong. It's not making any sound. It has a circular shape. He's going through the mental checklist and going, are there wings? No. Are there anything like a jet engine? No. Are there any propellers on it? No. And he's telling me, in his mind, he knows that he has never seen anything like this fly across the sky anywhere. And then he says, but that's not the weird part. And I said, well, what's the weird part? Obviously. He said it looked like somebody drew a line in the air. And as this disc crossed the line, he couldn't see it anymore.
Wow.
Now, he doesn't know whether it went somewhere else or whether, as some people suspect, some of these craft, for want of a better phrase, a cloaking device
Mhm.
where they can flip a switch and you can't see them anymore. So it's gone. He's standing there with his jaw hanging down, and all at once, here comes an F-16 fighter plane on afterburners from the Portland International Airport, which is where the Oregon Air National Guard has a small group of jets ready to go at a moment's notice. That is one of the airports where if they have to put up an armed fighter plane in a hurry, that's one of the places they'll originate. He sees this fighter plane going in the same direction as the UFO. So I take all this information, I ask him for a statement. He writes me, obviously, a high quality report. I'm enchanted because I just got the information. I contacted a friend of mine named Bill Puckett. Bill Puckett, hello?
Yeah, I think we may have somebody joining us here.
Someone is here.
Yes. Is that him?
Yeah, hi. Hello.
Hi. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Sorry.
We're talking with James Clarkson, former MUFON director. Anyway, let's go ahead, James.
So I contact Bill Puckett from UFOs Northwest, and the reason I contacted him is because this report was so recent. Bill Puckett, in a former life, was a NOAA weatherman, his expertise in the field of radar. So I get him to submit a FOIA request letter about this specific incident because I've got a highly credible witness in a specific location with a specific date and time, and it's very recent, which means the radar data should still exist. In order to get it, because they've become kind of nasty these days about getting radar data, I had to pay them a fee. I had to pay them like $200 out of my own pocket. And I did it because I thought, how often am I ever going to have a witness like this again?
Right.
So we got what we called a data packet for that period of time over Vancouver and Portland, Oregon. Bill Puckett unpacked the data and then he transposed it onto a map. What was interesting is in the same area of the sky where this UFO vanished, for 3 passes of the radar, something showed up as a solid object in the sky that had no transponder. Now
Wow.
that's really interesting
Not a
because
plane.
yeah, it's really illegal. Even a military aircraft, unless it was a time of war, you can't fly over a big city, let alone an international airport, and not have your transponder on. That would get you seriously busted, no matter who you were, for good reason. So I've got a federal agent who's putting his career at risk to make this report. It's a broad daylight sighting. It's of what is apparently a solid structured vehicle that shines like it's metal of some sort. We have it flying in ways that normal aircraft cannot fly, and we have it leaving the area in ways that we don't have the technology to duplicate, and it's being chased, I think rather obviously, chased by Uncle Sam.
Right.
Now, I don't think UFO sightings get too much better than that unless I could bring you the UFO on a trailer, and I submitted my case, and actually MUFON declared that one to be one of the 10 best cases of the year
I don't wonder.
because it was solid.
Yeah, I would think MUFON would have to come to that conclusion.
And there's another important point in all of this. I'm very, very, after doing this stuff for 30, 40 years, I'm always highly interested in people who take risks to make their report. And not only that, I'm even more interested in what happens when somebody reveals something at close to the end of their life. And the reason is that in the law, it's not quite the same thing, but it's getting close. In the law, there's a thing called a dying declaration. Let's say there's a bank robbery and I respond as a policeman, and one of the bystanders or customers or somebody has been shot. And I bend down and I ask him, I said, okay, did you see the man? Yes, I did. Describe him to me. Or let's say there's a shooting where the person who's dying knows who shot him. And the person says, I know that it was John Smith. Okay, that statement is admissible in court because the assumption is that when someone is going to die, that they are going to tell the truth. So it has a special status. And it's assumed if a witness is very elderly, I don't think this is unreasonable. And this applies especially to cases like Roswell.
That's what I was thinking of, Roswell.
Oh, yeah. Some of the key military witnesses, high-ranking officers who were formerly high-ranking officers, they get to the end of their life and they reveal it's true. A spacecraft of unknown origin did crash at Roswell. That has happened repeatedly. But anyway, that's my story. Well, that particular federal agent, when I communicated with him, we began, several of my best witnesses, just because you take their UFO report, they're not done with you. Usually what happens is they'll come at me and say, how do I learn more about UFOs? I don't know anything about UFOs.
Yeah.
And so I say, well, number one, you're not alone. And number two, there are all these really cool books that you can get involved in, or you can go on YouTube and hear these people lecture. And you can, get the same basic knowledge that I try to deliver out there when I do my public outreach lectures. Well, when he and I communicated, he wanted me to use hush mail because hush mail, when two hush mail customers email each other, the email is highly encrypted automatically, even to government grade. It's like really, really hard, according to what he said, to break into a hush mail. So he eventually went on his way, but I just kept the hush mail. So that's the story.
Good story. I want to welcome one of our other co-hosts, M, a friend of mine, and Dave Jinks. She's just joined us, so welcome to you, M. This is James Clarkson, who has had a real history of being in the UFO community. So we want you to jump in here where you feel you want to, okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me today on the show.
Sure. So James, how did you go from being a cop to being interested in UFOs? Did you have a UFO sighting?
No, but it's not quite as simple as going from one to the other.
Okay.
I grew up, and all of my life, I've had like two things that I really wanted to do out in the world. One of them was I've been fascinated by the UFO mystery at an early age. I just kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do. And even though I grew up in the turbulent 60s and I had to kind of push it away for a while, I always wanted to be a cop.
Mm,
And I ended up getting to do some of both.
yeah, cool.
Because I did do a 20-year career with Aberdeen, with the Aberdeen Police Department, and I served in the military as a plainclothes MP, and then I spent 2 years after that as a child abuse detective,
Oh,
a
boy.
commissioned deputy sheriff, child abuse detective. And then I spent 10 years. I wasn't like a regular law enforcement officer, but I was a fraud investigator for the Department of Licensing for 10 years. And then I got up to retirement age, and here I am. Meanwhile, all my life, ever since actually, it was a radio show back in the mid 60s. I was listening to KGO radio in San Francisco, and they were interviewing a man named John G. Fuller. And he had already written a really, really good book on the Betty and Barney Hill
Betty
case.
and Barney Hill. Yeah, I thought I
Yes,
recognized that
the
name.
Interrupted Journey, which is a
Yeah.
famous, it's kind of a landmark. It was one of the first really good books about an abduction case. Well, he was revealing his new book called Incident at Exeter.
Mm,
And the main stories about these Exeter, New Hampshire UFO sightings revolve around policemen who were on duty in Exeter, who they had like one or a couple of nights where it's like everything they were doing was UFO related. They found a woman in her car who was like white as a ghost, scared to death. She said that she was chased into town by a giant disc about 50 feet across with red lights going around it. And about that time, they report that in, and the desk sergeant says, "You better get in here." There's a witness there who said he saw the same thing.
mm.
So they take him out to the scene. They see the UFO, both officers and the witness. It comes down really, really low. So low, in fact, that the one policeman shoves the witness down on the ground and drops to one knee, and he's thinking about, he starts to pull his pistol, and the other officer says, don't do it.
Don't go there.
Yeah, don't go there. And it eventually flies off. But anyway, they had all these weird cases going on in the area. People whose TV sets and refrigerators quit working at the same time that the UFO went overhead. I was absolutely fascinated. And
Mhm.
after that, I started collecting books, newspaper articles, magazine articles. I started listening to anything I could on the radio, television, whatever. And of course, I'm a child of the 50s. I was born in 1951.
So was
And
I.
one of the greatest movies of all time that I have to say heavily influenced the way I see the universe is the original version of The Day the Earth Stood Still with Michael Rennie, and I think, is it Jane Wyatt? I forget who the lead in that is. But that's one of the great sci-fi movies of all time about contact with the aliens. And of course, I'm a big movie fan, so Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I mean, you name it, even the newest Arrival movie. Movies inform us.
They do.
Really good science fiction can open your mind to the possibilities. And I've just been fascinated by all of this. And then along the way, I joined MUFON. And I actually joined MUFON because while I was in the Army at Fort Lewis, I was a plainclothes MP. And one night I had to work 24-hour duty days all the time. And I was up looking at the military police desk at Fort Lewis. Now it's called Joint Base Lewis McChord, but back then they were separated. And I looked down at the desk sergeant's desktop, and he's got like 4 different telephones and a big piece of plexiglass and all these papers and everything. And I look under the plexiglass, and there's a whole bunch of business cards. And one of them says National UFO Reporting Center.
New Fork, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm in the police station. I'm in the MP station. I said, Sarge, what's that? And he says, that's where we report UFOs. And I went, wow. And I kind of filed that away in the back of my mind. And if you think back to late in 1986, early 1987, there was a huge news story. One of the biggest sighting cases ever was about a 747 with a Japanese pilot named Kenji Chiroshi, who was flying into Anchorage, I believe. And he and his flight crew saw a huge UFO. And initially, the FAA got it on radar. It was so big that it dwarfed his 747 plane. And it had other UFOs coming and going from it.
Oh,
So
gosh.
this goes on for like half hour, 45 minutes. He lands the plane, the newspapers go wild, it's everywhere. And then of course the FAA comes out and says, well, we didn't actually have it on radar. Well, they didn't actually have it on radar because the CIA had shown up and taken all of the data away and ordered everybody involved not to talk about it. And so that was all over the news. I still have the press release packet. I wrote to the FAA as John Q. Citizen and said, I'm really interested in this sighting. And they sent me back a beautiful thing, like 40 pages of information about that case. I've still got it sitting in the drawer. I don't know if get kind of help now, but back, I guess it was a different time. Well, I called the phone number that I remembered from being in the military police. And that was probably in 76, 77, somewhere in there. This is like, 10 years later. And I call that number 206-722-3000. And guess who answers the phone?
Peter Davenport.
No, his predecessor.
Oh, don't know
The founder of New Fork. Oh gosh, and now I've got to think of his name and it's slipping. Bob Gribble. Joanne just reminded me. Bob Gribble. He had passed the torch to Peter Davenport. So I said, I don't want to report a UFO. I want to know how I can help. He said, have you ever heard of MUFON? So I started going to meetings because back then there was a big group up in Seattle. There was Peter Davenport, Larry and Marilyn Childs, and a whole bunch of other people. In fact, they used to have some really cool meetings. They even had one meeting where they were able to hire a guest speaker. They had Eric von Daniken.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was cool. Talking about he was talking about ancient aliens. He's like the founding father of ancient aliens.
Chariots of the gods.
Oh yeah.
Just in case someone doesn't know this, MUFON stands for
Mutual UFO Network.
Okay. And why is that organization why is that organization kind of special? And I'm thinking about some of the efforts of the government to document UFO cases through Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, and then MUFON kind of grew out of that. Am I getting my history right here?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
In 1969, Project Blue Book was closed down. Lieutenant Colonel Hector Quintanilla, who ran Blue Book, he really, really wanted to get out of it. In fact, he was coming to his retirement time. And his argument was, you're wasting money on UFOs. There's nothing worth studying. Well, of course not, because all the really good cases were going through an entirely different channel system in the military. And, his job was to go out there. Basically, they were debunking. They were trying to keep the public
Right.
ignorant, keep everybody thinking that there's nothing really going on, nothing to see here, folks.
Right.
Move along, move along. And he thought, well, we played this out about as far as we can. And when that ended, within a couple of years, a new organization was started that was called, it was NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. No, wait, I'm getting my chronology mixed up. NICAP had started a few years earlier. There were several big UFO organizations. And interestingly enough, one of the founding members of NICAP was Roscoe Hillenkoetter, one of the original directors. He was the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency. And see, that's been the theme all along. These big UFO investigative organizations have always got people at the top that are deeply involved in the intelligence community. The treasurer of MUFON, who just retired 3 or 4 years ago, he never made it a secret. He was a career NSA employee, National Security Agency. I mean, it's always been there.
Yeah.
So, but MUFON grew when NICAP fell apart. They got on the wrong side. A couple of the key people, including Roscoe Hillenkoetter, basically became rebellious. They weren't following the script anymore. The government broke the organization up. They created internal dissension. It split up into a billion pieces. And there was a new UFO organization that rose out of the ashes that was founded by a man named Walt Andrus. And the goal was that it would be citizen oriented. In other words, the network would be of everybody, the average person who was interested in UFOs, not just scientists and engineers or former military people. It would be a different kind of organization. And we could argue for hours about, have they met that goal? What kind of an organization is it still? I don't know. I mean, I was a state director for 10 years, and it was very frustrating, I have to say.
I want to bring Ann in here and give her a chance to
Yes.
ask a question. Do you have a question for James?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you have worked for MUFON, so although, like you said, you can go on and on about how, if they met their goal or not, but you're not working with MUFON anymore, so what's
Well, yes and no. I guess I'm listed as state director emeritus. That means I don't have to take cases, but I'm there as a consultant.
Consultant, that's good.
Yes.
So did you personally go any place to investigate any of the cases?
Well, here's the problem. There is a reality to being in MUFON that is not commonly known. You have to keep in mind, it is a volunteer organization. So it is staffed by people, and even myself, at the time I was doing this, I had a family. I had a full-time job to pay the bills. I had a very tolerant wife who put up with the endless hours of me taking phone calls, doing follow-up interviews, and occasionally going out into the field. So in other words, and so you got to bear in mind, if I went somewhere related to a case, it was my car, my gasoline that I paid for. The time that I put into doing the follow-up interviews is my time. Nobody compensates. You don't get anything for being a state director or field investigator or anything else. There's no money. There's no compensation. They don't even give you a discount. It's the only organization I've ever seen in my life. Your state director, you put in hundreds of hours of volunteer time. They don't even give you a discount when you go to the symposium. You get nothing. Now, MUFON, and I know that this is still true. The state organizations in MUFON fall into two categories: haves and have-nots. And by that, I mean, there are some states like Southern California, let's say. They actually split California into two parts because it's so big. Southern California has most of the key members are in and around Los Angeles. Okay, so they can have a big meeting with 30 or 40 people show up. And maybe they charge them all $5 or $10 to come in the door, just to pay for the coffee and the refreshments, and maybe get a speaker in there once in a while. Okay. Organizations like Ohio, they may have, or Arizona MUFON, Colorado MUFON, they have, 20 people that are in the core of the organization, and maybe 30, 40 people who are field investigators and all of that. In Washington State, when I got MUFON, it was down to just a handful of people. Larry and Marilyn got old, and people drifted away. Peter Davenport, who was the driving force in the Seattle group, he decided to buy a missile silo in Eastern Washington and move over there. He was tired of Seattle, and his original thought was he was going to convert this missile silo into a place to live. And he learned very quickly that it cost way too much money to make it habitable. So he still owns it, but he lives in a nearby town. But my point of all that is, I never had very many people. If you've ever run a volunteer organization, it's like herding cats.
Right.
Just about the time you get everything going good, somebody will have a divorce.
Yeah.
Somebody gets sick. Somebody quits. Somebody's got a new job and they got to move away. I mean, that's people. And they're all volunteers too. And then you have the problem of the people in MUFON headquarters. They decide that they want you to fill out a longer form than you did last month. So there are more boxes to check and more things that you got to do. And they won't let you. It's the only investigative organization I have ever seen. And I've been in law enforcement. I know what you're up against with any kind of investigative unit.
Mhm.
You have people, you have resources, and you have money. That's what it comes down to. How bad do you want it?
Mhm.
So if you're dealing with volunteers, they don't have to work if they don't want to. And a lot of people join MUFON. I've actually had people join MUFON, and they would seriously would look at me and say, "Will you take me next time you go out to a crashed UFO?"
Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, I'll be glad to do that. I've dealt with one crash retrieval in
Oh,
my entire MUFON career, and in fact, I wrote a little book about it, the Westport UFO crash. But that's the only one. And a lot of people, the entire time they're in UFOs, they may never be directly involved in the investigation of a crashed UFO. They just don't happen that often.
mhm.
So let me
So-
ask you a
Sure.
question about the hierarchy of MUFON. So most people join MUFON probably just to get the MUFON journal. And then
Right.
if you want to get further into that, you can become a field investigator.
Correct.
And then some people who want to go further than that get involved with the experiencers resource team. And then you could
Right.
become a state section director.
State section director, or eventually you could be chief investigator, assistant director, or director.
So a lot of choices there, depending on what degree you want to get involved in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How much time are you willing to commit?
So did you start out as a field investigator?
Yes.
What's
Very
the most-
quickly, they made me a state section director because I was in Grays Harbor County and they didn't have that many members, period, down there.
Yeah,
And since I was a trained criminal investigator, they figured that I could probably write an investigative report.
yeah. Um, Tell us about one of the most interesting, significant cases you investigated as a field investigator. Something come to mind?
You mean now, most of the good ones that I had were after I became the director.
Oh, okay. Well,
I didn't really have, I mean, I guess here's the problem. And I should probably say this so that everybody can put this in proper perspective. And I think this is generally true. Using the Air Force statistics, it comes out the same way. I've talked to a lot of people and it comes out this way over and over again. I took 700 cases that I personally investigated over the course of being in MUFON for 30 years. Of that 700, you could take any 10 cases and they break down like this. There will be 4 cases to 5 cases that are caused by natural or man-made phenomena. There are going to be a couple, 3 cases that you're never going to get enough information to really make a good decision. It just isn't there. They're too thin one way or another. And out of that 10, when you eliminate everything else, there's going to be 1 or 2 cases that are gold. They are gold because they meet 2 criteria. They are high strangeness combined with high witness credibility. When you have high witness credibility and you have something really weird being reported, those are the cases that are the most important. That's where we have a chance to maybe understand this mystery a little better.
Mhm.
But you have to spend so much time. What's frustrating about being a MUFON state director is that you spend so much time dealing with those other 8 cases, dealing with the paperwork, filling out forms, all of this other stuff, that it's really, you lose sight of those 2 really good cases that you really want. And after I got burned out. That's what happens to a lot of state directors. You just get tired.
Mhm. So, my question to you is like, because you worked with UFOs for such a long time, and you've definitely come across a lot of cases, and you've
Right.
heard about all of this species that different. So, which UFOs, what kind intrigued you the most, or what kind of phenomena intrigued you the most
I
during?
like cases involved, for I think fairly obvious reasons. I like cases that involve law enforcement officers, pilots, military people, or anybody else who is a professional who is taking a risk to make the report. In other words, where they are weighing out, if I had something really, really strange happen to me and I got to talk to somebody about it.
Mhm.
And at the same time, they're thinking, but I have a professional standing to protect. And I'm afraid that if I make this report, it could damage my career. I could lose my job or lose my pension, but I've got to tell it anyway because something happened to me that's really important and
Mhm.
they know it. And you can tell when you interview them. I love that part of interviewing witnesses. You can watch it. You can watch the light go up in their eyes.
hmm,
When you interview them, there's a certain moment where they're almost reliving that thing that happened to them.
Yeah.
And, you know, I haven't had my own direct UFO experience. So I guess I live vicariously on the excitement of other people. But
I can understand that.
there is so much, but I'm an investigator. I was professionally trained. I arrest in 20 years as a cop, I arrested a lot of people. And I never knowingly falsely arrested anybody. I developed probable cause based upon information that was given to me. But in only very, very few cases did I ever see the person commit the crime.
Uh-huh.
And that's exactly my approach to UFOs. I haven't seen the aliens yet, or at least I don't know if I met one or not. Maybe I did.
Yeah, maybe you did.
Maybe I did. And if there's any aliens out there who want to meet me, I'm available.
Yeah.
But I don't have to be convinced that there's something real going on. I don't have to see every UFO or meet every alien. I just have to know that there are credible, sincere people out there that have fantastic experiences that point to a deeper reality than the one that we were taught in school.
Mm.
Mhm.
That's profound if you think about it.
Yeah. Mm. So what perspective did you develop over the years? I know you're interested, but did you, because I see everything in UFO field or alien or extraterrestrial, I come from a spiritual point to that, spiritual point of it. My personal experiences and my personal point of view just is directed by spiritual experiences. And do you think that somehow is related, interconnected, or it's
Yes,
okay?
I absolutely do. I do believe that. Over time, I have become more spiritual too, and I've started turning to other things, partially because I have an extraordinary wife
Mhm.
who has helped me along the way. We just celebrated 25 years of marriage.
Oh,
Congratulations.
congratulations.
Yes, and she is an intuitive, an empath. She uses palms and cards as a way of opening people up to things that they may not normally see.
Oh,
And I've learned an awful lot from her. Now, this, of course, could get me into trouble with some ufologists. I can't help that. I only know what I've been through, and I just have a feeling that this is all related, and that our spiritual evolution as human beings is closely related to our better understanding of who we are in the universe. The two things go together,
Mhm.
not separate. They're ultimately one. How exactly that works, I don't know. Faith is the belief in things unseen.
Hmm.
And that's an article of faith for me, is that we are growing towards something, a
Mhm.
better understanding. And for me, studying the UFOs and the beings who have contacted some people, that's a way of getting more in tune with the universe.
And that's a wonderful perspective. So, what do you think after all the reports you've investigated and being involved with UFO community, is there a common message that comes across from all that have experienced or people you've talked to? Do they have some kind of a common message coming across for all of us, or it's just random stuff?
I think that if there's one common theme that seems to come up over and over again, it's that we are not taking care of the world that we were given. We are not doing a very good job. And I guess, of course, we kind of all know that.
Mhm.
We're not quite sure what to do about it, but that seems to be the common theme. And most recently, I don't know if you've seen it, I contributed some money, what I could afford, to this movie project, and it took like 10 years for him to get the movie out, but
Oh.
it's finally available. It's called The Phenomena.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Is that
about the
James
aerial
Fox?
school. Yes,
James Fox, yeah.
Everyone should see that film, and they maybe should see it more than once. The story of those children at Ariel School from 1993 is a profoundly important story, because those children are now adults and they have not deviated one iota from where they were when they were children. They know that they met beings who were not from this world. And see, one of the other big things that drives me crazy is that every time someone makes a UFO report, the entire subject of ufology is put on trial. They isolate each case. Well, you just saw swamp gas. You saw the planet Venus, blah, 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 blah. Okay. And then, well, that takes care of the whole alien question. You can all go home now. And then they make fun of it. This is a deliberate policy by the US government that was started a long time ago in 1953 by the Robertson panel. They said they were going to do this to the American people, and they have. There is a book called The Missing Times. What was his name? He used to live up here in Bainbridge Island. He died a few years ago. Everyone should read that book, The Missing Times. It's the history of how intelligence agencies have penetrated the media industry in order to control our opinions about UFOs. This was consciously done a long time ago. It's still being done.
Okay.
But some things have happened that they can't control. And we have a tendency to think of the government as a monolith. It's not.
Okay.
There are factions, and there are white hats and there are black hats. And there are groups within the government who would like to tell the truth. They would like to let the information out, but they can't. And we're getting little bits and pieces, because when these two groups are fighting with each other, things slip. And we get to hear about it. That's how we ended up with this thing with the UAPs and all of that.
So my question to that would be, why do you think it is that government is hiding that from everyone? Because that comes up like anyone. So you have spoken to high personnel. They do have an agenda about hiding, but are they hiding it because the government wants to hide it? Or do you think it's the beings that are in contact with the government that want the government to hide?
It could be the beings, but I would say more than likely it's a question of the security system that we have in place, plus human personal interest.
Yeah.
If you're doing a career with the US government, whether you're in the military or some intelligence agency, you want a pension. If you disclose the wrong thing, if you're given that, there's some information that you might be privy to, you would like to leave your job in one piece.
Yes.
And not disappear. So you would like to survive your job. They have personal interest to go along with the system. The only way you're going to have to induce them to come out and tell the truth.
That's true, that everyone is scared.
Yeah,
are scared. Say the truth, because there are consequences for telling the truth out there.
Precisely.
What the question arises here is, why hide the truth? What could possibly be benefited from hiding the truth? Although there is a general concept why the truth is being hidden, to control the masses or to have more power in one place. But is that all to it, or
No, part of it's historic. Part of it is historical, and the government's policy towards UFOs is like steering a very large ship. If you want to turn a big ship, you have to plan a long ways ahead. You can't just go, oh, damn, I needed to make a right turn back there. It's not that simple. You're steering something that weighs, 10 bazillion tons and you want to make it go this way, you have to start planning how you're going to push it over that way. And it takes a long time to actually change things and turn them. Well, the government is the same way. The military is the same way. The biggest problem that the Air Force ever had with UFOs happened the same year that we got an Air Force. So one of the first things when it went from the Army Air Corps to actually being a separate branch of the service, the United States Air Force, it's the same year as Roswell. So right away, they're stuck with evidence that's hard to deny that something has arrived here on Earth that demonstrates a technology that we can't duplicate. Nobody else can. What if the Russians, just because we got a crashed UFO, maybe the Russians got one? What if they know how to fly one and we don't? We can't let them know that we've got this crashed UFO, but we haven't got any idea how to make it work. We've just got the wreckage and we've got some bodies. It's like you take your cell phone back 100 years ago and you show it around. It wouldn't mean anything to anybody. I mean, it looked magical, but there's no cell company to back it up. There's no place to get it repaired. There's no internet. There's no cellular service. So all of these things support that advanced technology. So we get a crash disk at Roswell. We don't have any idea how they build them, how they repair them, how they fly them. We don't know why they're here. We don't know any of that. Well, what if the Russians do? So everybody's afraid of everybody. So the only way that I can assure that we're going to have time to figure that out is to make this one of the highest classifications of secret that you possibly can put on anything. And the people who do know have got to be made afraid so that they will not divulge this under any circumstances. And that's the way it's stayed. And it's always easier to let things stay the way they are than it is to change them.
I was thinking a couple days ago when I knew this conversation was going to happen, I was thinking about the Brookings report in the 60s.
Oh, yes.
Which
That's a good one.
Yeah, basically said, if it were to be shown that there were advanced civilizations interacting with people on Earth, that the people on Earth were technologically inferior to or could do nothing to protect, the populace from, that would be a dangerous national security risk. And think about the oil companies, petrochemical companies, what they would be facing if there were other sources of energy that.
Oh, yes. Well, we just saw that in the news. The oil companies made record profits last year.
Yeah.
We're all struggling to put gas in our car. And meanwhile, they're raking in more billions than ever. And of course, I don't know what the alternative that is. I was just going to say, you mentioned the Brookings. This is a book that I cut my teeth on, and I certainly would recommend it to everybody. You can find copies of it. Clear Intent, the government cover-up of the UFO experience. It's an oldie but a goodie. But it has the Brookings, forward by Dr. Hynek. The author was Larry Fawcett and Barry Greenwood. I think Barry Greenwood is still alive. Lawrence Fawcett has passed away. But that is one of the best books ever. It's got all of that in there. The Brookings Institute, it's all based on government documents. That's what makes it such a fascinating book. It's not going out and speculating or just putting down, random UFO reports. These are government documents that they obtain and organized and assembled into this book. It's very powerful and persuasive.
Yeah, you can almost guess that if we were to realize that we're being contacted by people from elsewhere, that would threaten a whole lot of folks.
it could be seen as a threat. But then times are changing. I mean, right now, after COVID and everything else and the war in the Ukraine and all this other stuff, I mean, if you told people, yeah, aliens are real, they'd go, yeah, okay.
Bring them on.
Is it going to affect the average person's life?
Yeah, true.
Go ahead.
Well, let's go back to something you've looked into, and I'm kind of interested in the case you investigated in Westport and the book you wrote about it. Can you share with us what that case was all about?
Yes. The event that I wrote about occurred on November 25th of 1979 at 10:50 p.m. That was a Sunday night at the end of the Thanksgiving Day weekend. Now, interestingly enough, 1979 is the same year that I was a rookie policeman in Aberdeen. I was hired in May of that year. So I was a brand new policeman. And of course, you spend most of your time on night shift. And I didn't take the newspaper. And the internet was not going the way it is now. The internet didn't exist then. I did not look at the newspaper headline for the next morning, Monday morning, November 26th, 1979. If I had seen it, I would have seen a headline that said UFO crash in Elk River. And it had a long article that went on for 2 or 3 pages and had names of the witnesses and all of that. That was the first of 5 news articles all about this crash. Something came down out of the sky that was seen from as far as 30, 40 miles away, back towards Olympia. People on the highway between Olympia and Aberdeen observed this flaming, glowing, bright object going across the sky. And a lot of them thought that it was an aircraft of some sort that was in trouble. So many people thought that Scott Air Force Base put an official search number on it. The problem is nobody was missing any aircraft. There were no missing planes, no missing helicopters, nothing crashed, but something did. And people saw this thing coming down out of the sky. Now, how did I get this story? I started in 1979. The first several years I was a policeman, I did not tell my fellow officers that I liked UFOs.
And why didn't you?
Because I didn't want to be ridiculed.
Yeah.
And by the time I'd been there 3 or 4 years, I could give as good as I got. In other words, cops are the worst gossips on the planet. They gossip horribly. Well, let's think about that. What do they pay cops to do? They pay cops to find out the dirt on everybody. Well, they do the same thing to each other, and they kid each other mercilessly. I mean, obviously, if one of them is threatened by an outsider, they all lock shields and spears and protect each other. But amongst themselves, they're horrible. Even when I let them know that I was interested in UFOs, God, I got aliens in my locker, tinfoil hats, jokes all the time and everything else. But after a while, nobody wanted to debate me on it because they knew that I knew my stuff. And they all started telling me something crashed in the woods by Westport. So I went to the library and they had a file on it. And all these newspaper clippings and all the stuff they'd accumulated over the years. And I might add parenthetically that I was getting to know the librarian at that point, the children's librarian, because her name was Joanne and we eventually got married.
I think I know part of that story.
You know part of that story. But I realized that this was a really good story, and they named all the witnesses, the key witnesses, and I called them up and started interviewing them. Well, I had all this, I ended up with a big file of stuff, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. I thought originally that somebody had made a mistake, like maybe McCord fired off a missile accidentally, or maybe it was some foreign country's satellite or something, and it almost landed on the town of Westport. And they wanted to cover it up, so the military came down and got it and took it away. Because, see, there were two parts to the story. Part one was people describing this fiery object coming down out of the sky. There was a woman in Central Park who saw it, who almost, I felt, had a psychic connection with the thing, because she kept saying, they're in trouble. I saw them going across the sky, and I started thinking, they're in trouble, they're in trouble. She was really interesting. Well, anyway, one witness saw that the object made a maneuver. It turned before it went down, and that would indicate that it was under intelligent control. So that's part one of the story. Part two of the story, the people who didn't see the thing crashing, but they saw the military down there in the area of Westport and in the area of this marshy place across from the Elk River Bridge. And they saw military vehicles. And I met loggers who couldn't care less about UFOs. What they wanted to tell me was how they stood up to those soldiers, by God, who were blocking them from going to work. There were guys out there on the road in uniform with rifles, keeping people out of the area. There was one kid who was gone from school for like a week. And when he came back, he said, I made it in there. I made it in there. And they took my camera.
Oh,
And there were all these interesting stories, but I had all these collected, and I figured, well, this is all a military screw up. Well, that was up until we got approached by a witness who worked for the state of Washington, who was on his way to work, and he saw something the next night after the crash. He saw a very large luminous UFO with a smaller group of UFOs surrounding it. And he and all the other people who had pulled their cars off to the side of the road to watch this aerial display, and the big light had all these smaller lights around it, and it was right over the area where this thing had crashed the night before. And then they took off at extremely high velocity for parts unknown. So after that, I thought maybe there's way more to this story. And so at that point, I wrote this all up into a detailed report, and that's how I got my Westport crash book. So that's the essence of that story.
What are, and then I'm going to let Em get back in here. What are some other, and they don't necessarily have to be Washington cases, but what other UFO cases historically are significant to you? Or
Travis Walton.
Travis, yeah, Fire in the Sky.
I know Travis.
Oh, cool.
Because of the other person who I had the biggest influence on my life was, I should back up just a little bit. Down there in Grace Harbor, after Joanne and I first dated in 1993, and she recognized that I was kind of crazy about UFOs.
Really?
I mean, it wouldn't be too hard to tell. If you spent 5 minutes with me, you'd figure it out.
Yeah.
So she got me to start doing programs. I had never thought about being a public speaker, and I discovered that I'm a big ham and I really love it. So I started doing all these library programs, and librarians love it when they get a lot of people to come in for a program. I got so many people on UFOs that we were getting in trouble with the fire marshal.
Really?
For having too many people in the building. People love UFOs. It's one of the only programs where you can get all kinds of people to come out to hear about it. Well, one night in Ocean Shores, Washington, a very elderly lady came up to me. This was actually in 1993. And at the very end, she said, "You're right. The government knows all about UFOs and they're keeping it a secret." And I said, "Well, how do you know?" And she said, "I worked there." And
Mm,
I said, "Well," and I could tell she was very serious. And I asked her to tell me more. And she said, "I can't. They'll put me in jail."
yeah.
That was June Crane. She was known locally as June Kaba. That was her last married name. She'd outlived two husbands. And it took her 4 years to change her mind. But when she did, she changed my life because she chose me to give her life story. And it turned out that she grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and between 1942 and 1952, she worked for the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson
Right,
Air
Patterson,
Force
yeah.
Base
Mhm.
in top secret laboratories. And one of the things I learned about being a detective, if you have to investigate a business, I don't really care whether or not the boss talks to me, but I'm very concerned that the secretary likes me, the administrative secretary. I want to make a really good impression as a detective because if she likes you, you get to talk to everybody and you'll probably hear more of the really good stuff, like where the skeletons are buried and on the inside of how the organization works. The secretary usually knows more than anybody else, including the boss.
Mhm.
It was that way in the police department. We had an administrative secretary and an investigation secretary, and those two women ran the police department. I learned that early on. If you wanted anything done, you talked to them. Well, June was the same way. She was very bright. She was the only woman. She was young and attractive. And here she is working in a top secret environment with scientists and engineers working on all sorts of highly classified things, including at one point, she told me about working on something called Project Caucasian, which was the construction of a harness for a hydrogen bomb, the,
Wow.
parash- the parachute harness. So you could drop it out the back end of a bomber and it would take long enough to fall so that the pilot could get the plane far enough away that he wouldn't get caught in his own explosion.
Oh.
That kind of engineering. They also were involved in UFO investigations and the early United States rocketry program. So these people would talk freely in front of her because she had the same security clearance they did. She had to because she handled the documents.
Mhm.
So she had to be cleared just the way they were. Well, as long as they knew you were cleared, they could talk to you or talk around you. If you weren't cleared, they can't say a word. And what they said about UFOs and what they told the public were two entirely different things.
No doubt.
I wrote June's story into a book, which was called, because the last thing unfortunately, I only got to know her really well for about a year. She called me up in 1997 when the Air Force published a book called Roswell Case Closed. And they were doing that because 1997 in July was the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash.
I went there to Roswell that year.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, you
yeah.
made it to the good one.
Oh, it was a great
I
one.
made it there last year for the 75th. And we had 12,000 people through the front door in 3 days at the UFO Museum.
Mhm.
But in 1997, when they put that out on CNN, Roswell Case Closed, I got a phone call out of the blue and it was June. And the first thing she said to me was, she said, "It's a lie." And I said, "Well, good to hear from you." And she said, "Are you watching television?" And I said, "Yeah, I've seen the Roswell Case Closed." She said, "They're doing the same thing they did when I was there. It's the old balloon story. So we lied to people then about it. They're lying about it now." And then I said, "Well, can I are you willing to talk to me now? And she said, yes. And she said, I'm 72 years old. I've outlived 2 husbands and my cancer's in remission. What are they going to do? Shoot me or put me in prison? I can do either one. Well, I wasn't born yesterday. I said, how soon can I be at your house? And it turned out that she was kind of a night owl, and so was I. So I would get off duty and get out of uniform, and then I drove 25 miles out to Ocean Shores to stay up half the night hearing her life story.
Hmm.
And she decided to give me all of her personal papers, and I was able to get her on tape. And it's really fortunate that I got what I did. I wish I had had more time because her cancer wasn't that much in remission, and she died about a year later. And the last conversation I ever had with her, I said, June, what do you want me to do? You gave me all this wonderful information. And she said, Jim, tell my story. So my book is called Tell My Story, June Crane, the Air Force and UFOs. And I'm proud to say, not only did that open many, many doors for me, it has now been translated into French.
Wow.
So I know I can actually say I wrote something that somebody translated into another language.
Multilingual.
Yes.
So
It-
you mentioned Travis Walton. Now, why did you consider his case to be so significant?
Well, okay. As an outsider looking at the Travis Walton case, I like the scenario. I like the fact that he and his friends were polygraphed multiple times.
Mhm.
Not that the polygraph is infallible. Polygraphs are inadmissible in the court of law, but nowhere else that I know of has anybody in the UFO field ever been polygraphed. And the man who gave him the polygraph has written an official letter about the polygraph exam that is actually on Arizona Department of Public Safety stationery.
Hmm.
And I know something about polygraph operators, and I know how they're selected. What they do is they take their best detective who's really, really good at interviewing, and that's the guy that they pick to be the polygraph operator, because you want a really good interviewer when you're giving one of those exams. Because what happens a lot of the time is that you get the suspect in there and they're so afraid of the exam, they end up confessing. So you want to have the operator be a fully trained, highly experienced detective who can immediately flip over. Okay, let me get a statement from you. Now that you decided to get that off your chest, let's write that down. You'll feel better. Okay, that's how it's done.
Mhm.
And so for a polygraph operator to come out and say that those people on that crew, he's not saying that there definitely was a spaceship there. He's saying that when he interviewed all those people, they all thought there was a spaceship there.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then we have Travis Walton's story. And then I met Travis Walton. Joanne and him hit it off because Joanne retired as a hospice nurse and Travis Walton did a career as a paramedic.
Oh yeah.
So they kind of hit it off. We're talking medical stuff. And he's a really nice guy. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know him, but that's my impression.
he's a what you see is what you get kind of guy.
Well,
He's kind of burned out because he only has this one story,
yeah,
but it's a hell of a story.
it
You
is.
got to remember what they had in that movie, Fire in the Sky. You have to subtract out the part where he's on the spaceship.
Yeah.
That is pure Hollywood and complete fiction. That is not what happened to Travis Walton. The
I've heard.
rest of the movie, the way the setup, they're up on the mountain, they come down, they see the spaceship over the clearing. Travis gets zapped. The other guys flee in the truck. They think we really shouldn't have left Travis there. They go back. Travis isn't there. Neither is the spaceship. The involvement of the sheriff's office. the investigation that they thought that they maybe had murdered Travis and buried him up there. The search by helicopters, dogs, search parties, everything else were unable to locate Travis Walton for 5 days. Travis Walton's physical condition when he got back, all of these things point to his story is true.
Mhm.
But the implications of the story are what is so remarkable, because he met 2 different kinds of alien beings
Mhm.
during his adventure that were obviously working together and working around each other. He met the classic Greys, and then he also met they're called Nordics,
Mhm.
for want of a better description. They're people that they're so healthy they glow. They're like perfect human specimens. The men are all, buff, and the women are voluptuous and gorgeous. And it's strange because he probably, out of the 5 days that he was gone, he only remembers about a half hour.
Hmm.
And he says that as he's thought about this over time, it was like waking up in a hospital after you've been in a serious traffic accident. And it's very possible they weren't so much as abducting him as they saved his life, and then
Yeah,
they
I've
let him
heard that.
and then they let him go.
I've heard that narrative that maybe they took him on board a craft because they thought the beam that had hit him had injured him. So plausible. Well,
It sounded like, from the description, it sounded like that spaceship, whatever it was powering up, and standing under something that powerful when it's powering up was obviously not a good idea.
yeah.
And Travis is very honest about it. They asked, why did you jump out of the truck and go run underneath it when you heard you heard this thing powering up? And he says, I was young and stupid. He said, would I do it again? And I said, no,
Yeah.
that was
probably.
really dumb.
Yeah. Well,
But
I
he-
want to go
yeah,
ahead.
I was
No.
just going to say, but that's one of the cases that I really care about. If you start asking me which cases I'm intensely interested in, we'll be here all night.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should do that. Maybe we should have a part 2 of this. So
I'd be happy to do a part 2.
okay, well, we just recorded that on our notes here. So I want to be cognizant of the fact that you have something beside.
Jen, you're breaking up.
Yes, you are.
Am I? Yeah. Sometimes I have my internet connection is not. Yeah, it's telling me it's not stable. Can you hear me? Now?
Yes.
Now we can. I think
Yeah.
you got it back.
Yeah, who knows with Zoom. So I want to be cognizant of the fact that James has something to do beside talk to us. So,
I think I'm
Yeah.
going to have dinner in a while.
well, that'd be good. I haven't had
Yes.
my. So, Ann, do you have any final questions from James before we?
Mhm. Yeah, I have one final question that after all of this talk about UFOs and them visiting us, crashing here, and wanting us to do better as a species, why do you think they choose humans? Because over our entire universe probably has multiple species, if not thousands, maybe more or less. But why do they choose humans to give that message to? Why are we special? What do you think? Is there a message that comes across through your investigations that humans are special because of a certain thing, or it's again another general thing because they are a higher species or lower species and giving us a message as one of their duties? Or is there something different about humans?
I think you've almost answered my question in the question. I'd have to, to give this to you as succinctly as possible, I have to tell you something that I believe, again, article of faith, can't prove it. This is Jim's theory of the universe. Right now, physicists say there are four prime forces in the universe. There's gravity, electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, and the strong nuclear force. My personal theory is that someday they are going to prove that there is a fifth prime force in the universe. We call it life. I suspect that life is going to end up being out there all over the place, and that it isn't going to be much different than it is here on Earth. Here on Earth, there are so many different kinds of living organisms. You can barely count them all. How many species of insects are there? How many species of birds are there? What do they look like? What do they all have in common? Life competes to survive.
Mhm.
And we survive by working together, by forming groups, by being, figuring out how best to make our world easier to live in. Some of these alien beings, I think we're going to be very surprised, because when we finally meet them, it's going to be more of a family reunion than it's going to be a big shock. And that may be the biggest shock of all. Some of these alien beings are going to be truly alien. They're going to be vastly different than us. Some of them probably couldn't care less what happens to us or whether we survive or not. It makes no difference to them. It's like us walking down the street and seeing the ants walking across the pavement. If
Mhm.
we're feeling really kindly, we avoid stepping on them. Um, it's all going to be relative, but it is clear to me there has to be a reason why people keep reporting when they contact these beings that they have some kind of a warning message for us. We're being reminded to do a better job. Um, what I would just say finally in closing, one thing to keep in mind about studying UFOs, and I always point this out to people because it's extremely important. If I was an astrophysicist or an astronomer, my tools might be like the Very Large Array down in Mexico, 12 huge radio telescopes that I can point out into space, get all this information. Or I might use the Webb telescope in space, or the Hubble, or whatever.
Mhm.
Okay. When you're a ufologist, I say, okay, these are my tools because I study UFOs. And then I show a slide of a crowded city street. I have to depend on what people tell me. And that's so hard because everybody brings their own agenda. Everybody sees things a little different. When I was a policeman, if my witness was a beautician and
Mhm.
I asked her, what did the criminal look like? She's going to tell me all about the haircut the guy had, because that's how she sees people.
Yeah, well,
And it's the same thing when people see UFOs. They see it their way. It's
Yeah.
always about the observer and what is observed. And
Mhm.
you have to understand that and allow for it. And that's how I approach this entire field. And that's what makes it so hard. But it is all about that recurring message that we're getting.
Mhm. Yeah,
well,
that's a nice. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
no, go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's a nice way to eh, wrap the conversation up, that there is this message that we all need to understand, and it has been over the centuries, we're being reinforced by these entities, but it's also a vague message, or maybe it's meant to be understood by the very few they try to contact, and then be broadcasted further by those certain groups that they choose to communicate with. Um, so as a humanity, as a collective, we have to come together to understand that message better, I believe.
We all know that we have to.
And so that was all from me from my side. It was really good to hear your story and everything that you have investigated, experienced. it's good to know about those experiences, especially for me, and Dan knows why. So Dan, if you have anything to say, please go ahead.
Well, I just want to thank James for spending some time with us, and would really look forward to a part 2 where we could take some other questions and run with them. And I would like to thank Gam for being on here tonight and helping us out with the interview. So I'm just very appreciative of that. One of the things I like about what I get to do with this podcast, I get to talk to interesting people. And you two are very interesting people. So James, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
give
you.
our best to Joanne and Em. Thank you.
I will.
And I think Dave probably will have this in the next week. You'll have this edited, probably up on our YouTube channel. And he usually sends a notice via email as to when this stuff is ready. But thanks again to both of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Have a good
bye-bye.
night, everyone. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.